Our first encounter with Geralt wasn't actually in the Witcher 1 game, it was almost 20 years before that, with the release of the very first Witcher short story. This world and the character of Geralt were created by the Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski back in 1986. Over the next decade, the entire foundation of this world was built across 9 books. Now, before we begin, a quick note. I have already made a shorter video where I only review the Witcher game trilogy. If you're in a hurry or just want to know about the games themselves, you can check out that video from the link above or in the description. But if you want to truly immerse yourself in the world of the Witcher, then buckle up, because we are about to go on a journey. A journey where we'll first look at Andrzej Sapkowski himself and a story behind the creation of the novels. Then we'll cover the amazing origin story of CD Projekt Red. And finally, we will do a complete review of every single game released in the Witcher franchise. Part 1. Andrzej Sapkowski. Welcome back. The franchise we are reviewing this time is Witcher. Let's turn to the creator of the Witcher's world, Andrzej Sapkowski. He was born on June 21st, 1948 in the city of Łódź, Poland. Not much information is available about his family other than his father served in the army and was present at the Battle of Berlin. Sapkowski was born into an era when his country was rebuilding from the ruins of World War II. It was a time when people across Europe were grappling with severe economic and financial problems, and conditions for health and education were far from ideal. From his earliest childhood, Sapkowski developed an intense love for reading, especially science fiction and fantasy literature. In fact, in that harsh, industrial, post-war environment, he found refuge in the world of literature. A sanctuary that, decades later, would form the foundation for creating the world of The Witcher. But contrary to what you might expect, he didn't pursue an academic path in literature at all. Sapkowski went to the University of Łódź and graduated with a degree in economics. After that, he entered the world of business and worked for years as a senior sales representative for a foreign trade company. It was a job that involved extensive international travel and had absolutely no direct connection to writing epic stories. He was active in this profession from 1972 until the early 1990s, meaning even after he had started writing The Witcher. In fact, in 1985, when he wrote the first Witcher story, he was a 38-year-old economist and businessman, not a professional writer. So, how did this traveling economist become the author of The Witcher? His entry into the world of literature wasn't as a writer, but as a translator. Fluent in several languages, he began translating science fiction stories for Polish magazines out of personal interest, the most important of which was the popular magazine Fantastica. The turning point of his life came in 1985. That very same magazine, Fantastica, organized a short story competition. It's sad that his son, Krzysztof, encouraged him to participate. Sapkowski decided that instead of imitating Western fantasy, he would write a serious and thoroughly Polish story. He drew inspiration from his country's folklore and created his first 30-page short story, titled Wiedźmin, The Witcher. It was a story with a dark, realistic, and morally grey tone. The story was published in 1986, and the interesting part is, it didn't win first place. It came in third. But it didn't matter. The story of Geralt of Rivia became so popular among readers that the magazine was flooded with letters, all demanding more stories about this white-haired monster hunter. This astonishing public reception convinced Andrzej Sapkowski, the middle-aged businessman, to take writing seriously. And that was the beginning of the world we all know today. Geralt's popularity grew so much that Sapkowski continued to write new short stories about him, publishing them in the same Fantastica magazine. Now this is where the history of the first book gets a little complicated. First, in 1990, a publisher named Reporter collected 5 of Sapkowski's previously published magazine stories into a book, also titled Wiedźmin. This book is no longer in print today and is very rare. But in 1993, a larger publisher named Supernova stepped in. They took the previous stories, added a few new ones, and published them in a more complete collection titled Ostatnie Życzenie, The Last Wish. Therefore, although the first story was published in 86 and the first print collection in 90, the book we recognize today as the first official book of the Witcher series is The Last Wish, published in 1993, which laid the foundation for the entire saga. Alright, now we arrive at the golden era of writing the Witcher books, the late 80s and the entire 1990s. We should divide this period into 2 distinct parts. Part 1, 1986 to around 1994. During this period, Sapkowski's main job was still international trade. He was working as a senior sales representative, constantly traveling for business, and in his spare time, as a side gig, he wrote the Geralt stories. In these 7 years, he wrote the short stories that would make up the first book. Part 2, from 1994 onward. This is where everything changes. The success of the short story collections was so great that Sapkowski finally made that big decision. Around 1994, coinciding with the release of the first true Witcher novel, Blood of Elves, he quit his main job as a businessman and became a full-time author. And this is where his work process completely transformed. No more short stories. He had now begun a massive project, the 5-volume Witcher saga. Sapkowski, writing full-time, began releasing the novels at an impressive pace, publishing almost 1 novel every year. This continued until the end of the 90s, when in 1999 he concluded the saga with The Lady of the Lake. But what was his status at the time? In Poland, throughout the 90s, Sapkowski was a cultural phenomenon in his home country, a true literary superstar. They called him the Polish Tolkien. His books hit the top of the bestseller lists as soon as they were released and swept all the literary awards. But on the global stage, complete silence. Almost no one in America or Western Europe knew who he was. Why? Because his books had not yet been translated into English. Before we discuss the Witcher books themselves, let's see what Sapkowski was busy with after finishing the saga. He distanced himself from the world of The Witcher for a long time and focused on completely different projects. Between 2002 and 2006, he published the Hussite trilogy, a very heavy and serious historical fantasy set in the 15th century during the Hussite Wars, religious conflicts in the present-day Czech Republic. After finishing the trilogy, he published a completely standalone non-fantasy novel in 2009 called Viper or Żmija. This book is a realistic military story about a Polish soldier during the Soviet-Afghan War. And here we reach a fateful turning point for The Witcher, the year 2007. Exactly when Sapkowski was busy writing Viper, the first Witcher game was released. The game's launch sparked global curiosity, and interestingly, the first official English translation, the book The Last Wish, was also published in that very same year, 2007. But the real wave of global popularity began with the release of The Witcher 2 in 2011. The massive critical and commercial success of the game significantly boosted book sales. Sapkowski, seeing his book sales rise dramatically thanks to the second game, decided to write a new novel in the Witcher world. And after 14 years of silence, in 2013, he surprised all the fans by releasing Season of Storms. This book is not a sequel to the main saga, it's a standalone story that takes place in the past, set amidst the short stories of the very first book. And the final turning point? Without a doubt, the release of The Witcher 3 in 2015. The game was a colossal global success and one of the most acclaimed games in history. After the third game's release, sales of The Witcher books exploded worldwide and translations were quickly made into 40 different languages. It was after the third game that the book series surpassed 30 million copies sold, turning Sapkowski into one of the best-selling fantasy authors in the world. This success has prompted Sapkowski to once again think about writing more from this world. In 2024, he published the second prequel novel in the series, Crossroads of Ravens, a novel that delves into Geralt's youth and his very first missions after leaving Kaer Morhen. Part 2. Books. First, we have the introductory books, The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny. These two books do not follow a single linear plot, instead they are both short story collections. The Last Wish is a collection of 7 short stories, cleverly connected by a frame story. In the book's present day, Geralt is at the temple of the goddess Melitele, recovering from serious injuries. Each of the other stories in the book is actually a flashback that Geralt recalls during his time healing. The Last Wish is considered the true gateway into the world of The Witcher. It introduces key characters like Geralt, Yennefer, and Dandelion, and it establishes the most important storyline of the entire series, the bond of destiny between Geralt and Ciri. The second book, Sword of Destiny, much like the first, is not a single novel. Instead, it's a collection of 6 interconnected short stories that continue Geralt's journey. The primary importance of Sword of Destiny comes down to 2 things. First, the official introduction of the character, Ciri, where we meet the Princess of Cintra for the first time. And second, it delves deeply into the law of surprise and the unbreakable bond of destiny between Geralt and Ciri. Overall, these first 2 books are known as the comprehensive introduction to the Witcher world. In these volumes, the world's framework and character take shape, and Geralt is transformed from a wandering monster hunter into a destined father figure. These 2 books set the stage for the 5 main saga novels, all of which revolve around protecting Ciri. Next, we come to the second part, the 5 main books of the Witcher saga: Blood of Elves, 1994, Time of Contempt, 1995, Baptism of Fire, 1996, The Tower of the Swallow, 1997, and The Lady of the Lake, 1999. These 5 books are, in reality, the story of an unexpected 3-person family forming between Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer. Their journey begins with Geralt and Yennefer trying to protect and train Ciri, but the world, full of chaos and war, tragically tears this family apart. From that point on, the story splits into a parallel journey. On one hand, Geralt begins a long and perilous trek across a war-torn continent with a single goal to find Ciri. On the other hand, Ciri, now alone, must endure a harsh journey of survival, discovering her true identity and learning to control her powers, all while constantly on the run. At the heart of all these novels is Geralt's quest as an adoptive father to reunite his fractured family. And finally, we reach the third part, the prequel novels. Season of Storms, which was published in 2013, is a standalone novel. Its story takes place during the short stories of The Last Wish, and it follows Geralt's quest to find his precious lost swords. And the novel, Crossroads of Ravens, published in 2024, delves into Geralt's youth and his very first missions immediately after leaving the Witcher stronghold, Kaer Morhen. Part 3. CD Projekt Red. CD Projekt Red, known today as one of the most prominent video game developers and the creator of the acclaimed series The Witcher and Cyberpunk 2077, began its journey from a very different place. The company was founded in 1994 by Marcin Iwiński and Michał Kiciński in Warsaw, Poland. In that era, following the collapse of communism, the Polish video game market was heavily dominated by piracy. CD Projekt's initial goal was to legally import and distribute original Western games on CD. Their main challenge was competing with cheap pirated copies. To add value, CD Projekt adopted a strategy of high-quality localization. The turning point for this strategy came in 1998 with the release of Baldur's Gate. Unlike the common translation of the time, the company invested significantly to fully dub this role-playing game into Polish using the country's most prominent voice actors. This move was a massive commercial success. The high sales of Baldur's Gate in Poland, 18,000 copies on the first day, proved that the local market had a demand for high-quality, localized products. This success turned CD Projekt into the top game distributor in Poland and provided the necessary capital for their next step. Relying on this financial success, the founder decided to move beyond distribution and enter the world of game development. In 2002, they officially established their game development division under the name CD Projekt Red. This newly founded studio began its work with a huge gamble on Poland's national treasure, the Witcher book series. In the early 2000s, as the new studio was looking for its first project, they faced a major challenge: the author himself. Andrzej Sapkowski had no faith in the success of video games, considering the industry to be a trivial form of entertainment. When CD Projekt approached him for the game rights, Sapkowski, convinced the project would fail, rejected an offer for a percentage of future profits. Instead, he preferred a single, upfront cash payment of about $9,500. This fateful deal, while considered one of the most one-sided in gaming history today, allowed the small, unknown Polish studio to gain full creative control of the project on a limited budget. However, acquiring the rights was just the beginning of a grueling 5-year journey. The development of The Witcher 1, which lasted from 2002 to 2007, was filled with crisis and learning. The initial team members were not experienced developers. They were distributors who now had to learn everything as they were making the game. Their biggest technical challenge was the Aurora engine, which they had licensed from BioWare. This engine was designed for isometric top-down games, while the team wanted to make a third-person, over-the-shoulder game. This ambitious decision forced them to rewrite nearly 80% of the engine's code, a task that took almost as much time as building a new engine from scratch and became the main source of the project's technical problems. This lengthy development constantly kept the company on the verge of bankruptcy. The distribution side of CD Projekt had to inject all its profits directly into the project just to keep the development team afloat. They even had to completely reboot the project once. Their initial demo, which looked more like a hack-and-slash action game, was rejected by every publisher. The team decided to return to the story-driven roots of the books and build a deep, narrative-focused RPG. Finally, after 5 years of battling financial and technical difficulties, The Witcher 1 was released. Part 4. Games. Witcher. Release 2007. Meta 81. Release platforms PC. Cost $1 million. Sell 2 million copies. Playtime main story 35 hours, main plus extra 46 hours, completionist 63 hours. The Witcher 1 was a title full of ambition, with a deep story and a dark world that set new standards for moral choices. But this ambition was not without its costs. The game, especially at its initial release, suffered from technical problems and strange gameplay mechanics. If The Witcher 1 succeeded perfectly at one thing, it was its storytelling and world building. The game begins right after the events of the books, as Geralt, the famous Witcher, is found by his friends at Kaer Morhen with no memory. This amnesia is a clever narrative tool. It not only allows new players to discover the complex world of The Witcher alongside Geralt, but it also gives longtime fans of the books a fresh perspective for re-examining the character. The story's beating heart is in the city of Vizima and its outskirts, a city gripped by intense racial tension between humans and non-humans, elves and dwarves. The game's story is deeply political, personal, and full of adult themes. In the world of The Witcher, there are no good or bad choices. There is only the lesser evil. The game constantly puts you in situations where you must choose between two bad options: the Order of the Flaming Rose, who are religious, anti-non-human zealots, and the Scoia'tael, the elven guerrilla fighters. Trying to remain neutral often carries the heaviest consequences of all. The outcomes of these choices would catch up to you hours later in unexpected ways and could change the fate of entire city districts in later chapters. This level of moral grayness was rare at the time and created a narrative that remained incredibly faithful to its source material. The gameplay of The Witcher 1 is where opinions become sharply polarized. Instead of using a standard action RPG system, CD Projekt Red went with a unique combat mechanic that many describe as rhythm-based. You couldn't just win fights by mashing buttons. Instead, after starting an attack, you had to wait for the sword icon to flare up and click again at that precise moment to continue Geralt's attack chain. Geralt had 3 sword fighting stances, each with a specific use: strong style to break the armor of heavy enemies, fast style to hit agile attackers, and group style to control crowds. The player had to constantly switch between these styles based on the enemy type. Furthermore, the alchemy system played a vital role. Unlike in later games, drinking potion had to be done before combat, during meditation. Players had to spend time gathering herbs and monster parts and manage their toxicity levels. For some, this system was tedious and clunky, but for others, it was tactical and true to the nature of a Witcher who prepares for a fight. This part of the game requires immense patience and is definitely the biggest hurdle for new players. The Witcher 1 was developed using a heavily modified version of the Aurora engine, the engine used to build Neverwinter Nights. We have to be honest, this engine was fundamentally designed for isometric, top-down games, and CD Projekt Red forced it to run a third-person game. As a result, even in 2007, the game's graphics, especially the character animations, looked dated. Faces were lifeless and movements looked stiff. However, where the game was weak in its technical aspects, it compensated with its art direction and atmosphere. The game's environments, from the muddy outskirts of Vizima to the poor districts and foggy swamps, all perfectly conveyed the sense of darkness, despair, and danger present in the story. The game's soundtrack is also fantastic and memorable. It must be noted that the Enhanced Edition, which was released a year later, was a massive overhaul. This version reduced the excruciating load times by up to 80%, re-recorded many of the weak English dialogues, improved animations, and redesigned the user interface, effectively turning the game into the version we know today. At the time of its release, Major websites all praised the game's deep story, impactful moral choices, and rich world building. The game's scores were generally good, often above 8 out of 10. However, nearly all reviews pointed to the technical problems, bugs, long loading times before patches, and most importantly, its strange and cumbersome combat system. The player community was also split in two. There were those who couldn't connect with the gameplay and abandoned it. But the second group, those who pushed past the gameplay barrier, discovered a deep and unforgettable RPG experience. The Witcher 1 wasn't a huge commercial success, but it became a beloved cult classic. Its sales over time provided the necessary capital and credibility for CD Projekt Red to take the next ambitious step in creating The Witcher 2. Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings. Release 2011. Meta 88. Release platforms Xbox 360, PC. Cost $10 million. Sell 2.5 million copies. Playtime: main story 24 hours, main plus extra 34 hours, completionist 56 hours. If The Witcher 1 was a promising but rough start, The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings was the resounding slap that CD Projekt Red used to announce its arrival to the entire gaming industry. Released in 2011, this game abandoned almost every aspect of the first installment. With a new graphics engine and a focus on cinematic narrative, it delivered an experience that was far more polished and yet far more brutal. This was no longer just a passion project from a Polish studio. This was a direct competitor to Western RPG giants like BioWare and Bethesda. The Witcher 2 begins immediately after the events of the first game. Geralt now serves as King Foltest's personal bodyguard, but he soon finds himself at the center of a massive conspiracy. The King of the North are being assassinated one by one by a mysterious Witcher, Leto, and Geralt, framed as the prime suspect, is forced to flee and clear his name. The story of The Witcher 2 is far more focused, political, and cinematic than the first game. Those long wanderings in the outskirts of Vizima are replaced by a dense political thriller. The game is filled with complex intrigues, betrayals, and grey characters. But the game's narrative masterpiece happens at the end of Chapter 1. You are forced to make a choice, siding with Vernon Roche or Iorveth. This was not a simple choice. Roche, the leader of the kingdom's special forces, symbolized order, loyalty to the king, and the human perspective. In contrast, Iorveth, the leader of a Skoyatal guerrilla unit, symbolized the fight for non-human freedom and rage against oppression. This choice didn't just change a few lines of dialogue, it changed the entire second chapter of the game. Players were literally sent to a completely different location with unique storylines, characters, and quests. This was a true branching narrative where players would miss a huge portion of the game's content on their first playthrough, incredibly boosting its replay value. CD Projekt Red completely threw out the strange rhythmic combat of the first game and replaced it with a modern action RPG system. Combat in The Witcher 2 is fast, fluid, and extremely challenging. Gone are the time clicks. Here, you must dodge, parry, use signs tactically, and look for an opening in the enemy's guard. Every sword strike felt heavy and deliberate. Preparation, which was important in the first game, became vital here. Entering a tough fight with awe, drinking the right potions, applying oils to your sword, and setting traps was almost a guaranteed death sentence. The Quen sign, a magical shield, becomes your best friend. This game demanded that you think like a real Witcher, investigate, prepare, and then attack with precision. This new system was a massive improvement, but it wasn't without its problems. the game is notoriously difficult, especially in the tutorial and the first chapter. Its learning curve is incredibly steep, and it severely punished players who were expecting a simple hack-and-slash action game. The Witcher 2 was the first game built with the studio's proprietary engine, the Red engine. The result was stunning. At the time of its release, this was one of the most beautiful games in history, especially on PC, and set new standards for graphics in RPGs. Unlike competitors such as Skyrim, which focused on massive open worlds, The Witcher 2 used a structure of semi-open hubs. This allowed the studio to push the graphical detail to an obsessive level. From the lush, dense forests of Flotsam, with light beams cutting through the foliage, to the foggy military camps and ruined cities, everything was designed with breathtaking detail. The lighting, texture quality, and intricate armor designs were all world-class. This was a full generational leap over the Aurora engine from the first game. The Witcher 2 was met with widespread critical acclaim. Websites like IGN and GameSpot gave it extremely high scores, often 9 out of 10 or higher, praising it for its mature story, truly impactful choices, and groundbreaking graphics. This game proved that CDPR was a top-tier global studio. The success was amplified by the 2012 release of the Enhanced Edition on the Xbox 360, which was a massive technical achievement in itself, and it introduced the Witcher name to a console audience that was previously unfamiliar with the series. However, nearly all reviews pointed to two negative aspects. One, the brutal difficulty. Many felt the game was far too hard at the beginning and scared players away. Two, the combat system. Although it was a big improvement, some still found it a bit clunky and sometimes unresponsive, especially compared to its action genre competitors. Players echoed these same sentiments. Fans of hardcore RPGs fell in love with its tactical depth and unfiltered story, but more casual players were often frustrated by the difficulty. The Witcher 2 may not have been perfect, but it was a bold and vital step that provided the credibility, budget, and technical experience CD Projekt Red needed it to create its next masterpiece.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.
Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Release 2015. Meta 93. Release platforms: PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox One and Series, PC, Nintendo Switch. Cost $83 million. Sell 60 million copies. Playtime: main story 51 hours, main plus extra 103 hours, completionist 175 hours. After two successful yet somewhat niche games, CD Projekt Red took a massive gamble with The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. They took the narrative ambition of the first game and the action-oriented gameplay of the second and placed them within the framework of an unprecedented, massive open world. This was a bold leap that could have easily ended in failure. But the result was not only the best game in the trilogy, but a title that redefined the standards of the open-world RPG genre for an entire generation and cemented its name as one of the greatest and most awarded video games of all time. At its core, the story of The Witcher 3 is surprisingly personal and emotional. This is no longer a complex political conspiracy like The Witcher 2, but rather a desperate search. Geralt of Rivia is looking for Ciri, his adopted daughter, who is now being pursued by the Wild Hunt, a group of spectral riders from another world. This personal focus, a father searching for his daughter, gives the game a powerful emotional weight. But CDPR's masterpiece is in how it tells this personal story within a vast world engulfed in the third devastating war with Nilfgaard, famine, and prejudice. The world doesn't wait for Geralt, and his quest often feels small against the enormous problems of ordinary people. However, the place where The Witcher 3 truly shines and distances itself from all its competitors is in its side quests. In an era where open-world games were filled with repetitive fetch quests, The Witcher 3 offered side quests that each had their own short story, memorable characters, and complex moral choices. The Bloody Baron questline, all on its own, is a multifaceted Shakespearean tragedy that is deeper and more impactful than the main stories of many other games. The Witcher 3 took the action combat system of The Witcher 2 and polished it to an incredible degree. Combat is far more fluid, dynamic, and responsive. Geralt can now move smoothly between a quick dodge and a defensive role, and combining sword attacks with magical signs feels more satisfying than ever. But the gameplay is about more than just combat. This game perfected the fantasy of being a Witcher. You track monsters like a detective, follow clues using your Witcher senses, study your bestiary for a monster's weaknesses, craft the right potions and oils, and finally haggle over your reward. Exploring the massive game world, including the war-torn land of Velen, the bustling city of Novigrad, and the stormy isles of Skellige on horseback, with Roach, or by boat, is an entire experience in itself. And of course, we cannot forget Gwent, an addictive card game that became a cultural phenomenon among players. At its release in 2015, The Witcher 3 was a visual marvel. Even today, the game's art direction is breathtaking. From the bloody sunsets over the swamps of Velen to the fierce winds bending the massive trees of Skellige, this world feels alive and dynamic. The game's soundtrack, a mix of epic orchestrations and Slavic folk melodies, is masterfully woven into the game's atmosphere. The voice acting is also at the highest possible level. Geralt's very gravelly voice, in a peerless performance by Doug Cockle, has become the symbol of the character. The game was met with unprecedented universal acclaim. The Witcher 3 set a historical record by sweeping up over 800 different awards, with over 250 of those being direct Game of the Year titles. Nearly every major outlet gave it a perfect or near perfect score, 9s and 10s out of 10, praising its storytelling, side quest design, world building, and the unbelievable volume of high quality content. Players fell in love with the game as well. The Witcher 3 was a massive commercial and cultural success. Although it suffered from bugs at launch, CD Projekt Red's incredible post-launch support with numerous patches ensured player loyalty. This support culminated in the release of two massive critically acclaimed expansion packs. These two packs, which set new standards for post-launch content, were not simple add-ons but independent narrative masterpieces. Hearts of Stone. This expansion was a dense, dark, and deeply personal narrative thriller. Hearts of Stone entangles Geralt in a contract with a mysterious and immortal being named Gunther Odim, or the Man of Glass, a character who is the very personification of evil. Geralt is forced to fulfill 3 impossible wishes for an immortal nobleman named Olgierd von Everec. This expansion tells a tragic, Faust-like story, a deal with the devil, and is filled with memorable moments, including a complex heist and attending a haunted wedding. More than focusing on exploration, this expansion was a concentrated masterpiece of storytelling, Blood and Wine. If Hearts of Stone was a dark tale, Blood and Wine was an entirely new epic adventure and in effect a grand finale for Geralt's entire saga. This expansion takes Geralt to an entirely new land, the Duchy of Toussaint. This land, unlike war-torn Velen, is a bright, colorful, fairy tale-like region, steeped in wine and knightly culture. Geralt is summoned to hunt a mysterious beast that is brutally murdering the duchy's knights. But this simple hunt quickly unravels into a complex conspiracy involving high-ranking vampires, ancient curses, and the hidden history of this seemingly idyllic land. With dozens of hours of content, an entire new map, and a deep story, Blood and Wine was larger than many full-priced games. Most importantly, it provided an emotional and satisfying conclusion to the long journey of Geralt of Rivia. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, along with its expansions, is an undeniable masterpiece and a cultural phenomenon. It is the culmination of a trilogy that began with ambition, continued with focus, and finally ended with perfection. It is a title that proved an open-world game can have both an epic scale and a deeply personal, detailed story. The Witcher 3 is not only CD Projekt Red's best game, it is a defining achievement and a golden standard by which all subsequent RPGs are measured.